since we're talking about good things, for balance, let's talk about problems. Headwinds, structural headwinds in higher ed. Seems like we've got a number of them. It seems like we're in kind of a reevaluation in America around what is the value proposition of higher ed. Seems like we maybe got over our skis a little bit on people with student loans for degrees that maybe weren't the pathways to the types of jobs that would actually pay back the loans, kind of thing. The one thing about engineering, it sure seems to me, is it's very much fixed towards real problems and real jobs. And I do want to, as we talk about the problems, maybe shift then to the why engineering is still a wonderful route from a job prospects. But let's talk just a little bit about the overall headwinds that face universities that are also affecting your guys' colleges. So start with Alan.
Yeah, sure. No, I think I think you alluded to something there when we talk about the enrollment challenges, the headwinds, because this is a national problem. The difficulties or challenges we're facing is what many universities are facing regionally, nationally. But one of those revolves around this national narrative on the value of a four-year degree. And because we've all heard the stories of, students who rack up, significant student loan debt and then can't find, good paying jobs. And so then it paints this picture that we're taking their money and not giving them anything that's going to pay off. And I think that's a very unfortunate narrative, because I don't think that in many of our cases that exists. But we see it here locally. Part of that challenge also really is related to the economy and the need, I would say the overall shortage of labor throughout the market. In this state, in this region, nationally, we need people who are in the trades. So you need people with the 2-year degrees, or even there's great paying jobs out there that you can do right out of high school. And so, convincing a high school student to go back to school for 4 more years when they can look at a pretty big paycheck right off the bat, that's a hard sell. And so I think we all know that the value of that will be there. It will show up down the road. The overall earning power and earning potential of a 4-year college graduate far exceeds that of a non-college graduate. And so making that case and convincing students that, yes, the sacrifice is going to be worth it has gotten a little bit tougher because of the labor market, the job market. That's just one of the challenges. I mean, overall, nationally, there's a decline, or there's an upcoming decline in the number of high school graduates. And we talk a lot about this problem called the cliff, the enrollment cliff, which really begins in about 2026, which is 18 years after 2008, which was the recession, and the number of births declined at that point in time.
A shift in the slope.
The slope
birth rates
of the number of available high school graduates nationally will decline. Now, interesting point, though, North Dakota is not experiencing that trend. We're actually projecting an increase in the number of high school graduates. But the population of North Dakota is very small. Many of our students come from neighboring states, in particular Minnesota. And so we have to look more regionally when we talk about what will that impact of the decline in high school graduates. So I think we're all institutions are going to be fighting over a smaller pool of students, and so you're seeing that impact on many institutions. Some institutions are feeling it more than others. So. Those are a couple of the challenges we face. Many more. I'm sure Brian can elaborate on
anything you want to add.
Challenges.
Yeah, I mean, exactly the same issues are at the top of my mind all the time. As Alan mentioned earlier, that the state has been very generous to the universities, but most of our revenue comes from tuition. So we're very tuition dependent, meaning we're very enrollment dependent, and so these demographic issues are are certainly a challenge. We're going to be facing more and more competition. We have our neighbor to the east trying to hang on to as many of their students as possible. So not only are our enrollment numbers going to be potentially down, but I think the days of double-digit increases in tuition are far behind us as well. So we're not going to be able to increase tuition to maintain revenue.
Right. No, that will drive. That's part of the value prop. Is that the very there's a cool graphic of like the things that have inflated versus deflated over the past 20 years, and like healthcare and education have gone way up, while a number of things that are sort of tech driven or and also where the regulatory environments aren't quite as fixed as healthcare and higher ed, where you have a lot more gatekeeping, a lot more credentialing required. But the cost of higher ed is certainly part of the value proposition, and figuring out how to innovate and how to do more with less. And is there a way in which we could see a future where tuition could come down, or at least the total cost of tuition? We're seeing that you talked about the trades, but there's also this trend towards micro-credentials, this reevaluating the value of a four-year degree, but at the same time, you guys have the domain knowledge, you guys have the experts, you're literally machines to teach. So what are the credentials that are of value? And I know that the certificate programs have been growing quite a bit, and it seems like everybody's leaning into that. Nobody exactly knows what the balance is supposed to be, but everybody seems to be on board of it's not just four-year degrees, and what is it that, where are the jobs, and how do we bring in the students, and how do we balance everything? So tough challenges, tough decisions for deans, especially with when things shrink. If things shrink 5%. That's no big deal. Oh, that's a big deal, because especially if you shrink 5% and you just shrinked 5%, say a little while ago, you are already as lean as you could be. Now you have to figure out how to do more with less. What aren't you going to fill if somebody retires, and a lot of interesting challenges that way that isn't going away. I'm Todd Pringle, and this is the Crosswinds Institute podcast. My guests are Brian Tande and Alan Kallmeyer, the deans of the colleges of engineering and computational sciences from both of North Dakota's great research universities, UND and NDSU. We talk about the unique role of the college dean, the headwinds facing higher education right now, the challenges of online learning, some exciting new engineering buildings coming up, and why our best young engineering minds should stay in North Dakota. Thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate this. Very briefly, the views expressed by the host and guests are at least our own, and not necessarily reflective of various organizations we're a part of. That's predominantly for me, and I never quite know what I might say. So thank you for coming. Maybe we can get started with just briefly introduce yourselves, and we'll get going after that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Todd. Great to be here. My name's Alan Kallmeyer. I'm interim dean for the College of Engineering at North Dakota State University. Kind of new to the job, been in this position a little over a year now, year plus. Having a great time at it. Not new to the university. I've been at NDSU for coming up on 29 years. So not a native North Dakotan. Grew up in Utah, got my
29 years makes you
29
makes pretty
years.
North Dakotan at this point. But
I call myself that now. I'm almost got the accent perfected, but still working on it. No, grew up in Utah, got my education there, undergraduate degree there, went to University of Iowa for my graduate school, and then came here in 1995. Background is in mechanical engineering, rose up through the ranks. I was chair of mechanical for about 17 years before taking on this role. So
And you had another interim dean role in between, right?
I did do a short stint, interim dean for the College of Business, which was really fun.
That's kind of cool that an engineer for a while had the helm of the College of Business, and you did really well.
It was, well, thank you. It was a learning experience for me, but it was great to get to know some other faculty and kind of learn the ropes before taking over this position here in the College of Engineering.
Cool. And we do want to spend a tiny bit of time of exactly what is it that a dean does. But let's get our second dean introduced here. Brian?
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Alan. I'm Brian Tande. I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering and Mines at UND. I've been the Dean now about 5 years, including a year as the interim Dean. I've been at UND since 2006. Started as a faculty member in chemical engineering, then became a department chair, and eventually associate dean, and now the dean. So I am a North Dakota native, and that's the important part of the role, at least how I approach the role, in terms of our commitment to the state of North Dakota. Prior to joining UND, I worked in industry, including with our wonderful host here.
Yeah,
previous
Brian
role.
and I used to work together.
Worked for
back in the day.
Yeah, I worked for a division of Marvin Windows. Prior to that, I worked for GE Plastics. Generally, my background's in materials and composites.
So you have the first part of your career was in industry in a couple different places, and then full disclosure, you and I have founded two material ventures, successfully commercialized and licensed some materials tech. So we go way back, and of course, I'm an alum multiple times over from NDSU, so I feel like I really know both of you.
Sure.
You said something that was interesting. Maybe we take a moment on definitions here. Land grant, School of Mines. What is all that? You said engineering and mines. What you hear that sometimes? What does that mean?
Sure.
And then to contrast it, what does it mean to be a land grant? But
sure, yeah. I mean, I think the School of Mines at UND was established, if I remember right, as part of the North Dakota Constitution. And it was just to support the mining industry in the state at the time. There was a separate College of Engineering, and sometime 100 years ago or so, they merged to form the School of Engineering and Mines. And then a while ago, it changed names to the College of Engineering and Mines.
Okay.
So we're not a land grant, but we are, we have a long history of being part of the state and serving the needs of the state in a way similar to a land grant.
You see that if anyone's watching, looking at potential engineering schools for either themselves or their kids, you'll see those school of engineering and mines oftentimes,
right.
and then other universities won't have it.
Sure.
But oftentimes engineering is coming from the either I guess a more conventional route, and then subsequently the land grant route.
Mm-hmm.
So what's a land grant? How is that different?
Yeah, so land grant, which pretty much every state has a land grant school, part of the Morrill Act signed by President Lincoln back in the day, establishing a school basically to help educate kind of the masses. The traditional school for the non-elite. Make education accessible for everybody. It was kind of the original mission. The educational mission really focused on two components: agriculture and the mechanic arts, what was written into the original Morrill Act. And so the mechanic arts side of it is really what grew into the engineering programs. And so at NDSU, we have a lot of the conventional mechanical, electrical, civil engineering programs, just like UND. But some of the other, what sets us apart is really the agricultural tie. And so we have a strong connection to agriculture. And as part of that land grant mission, we have, an extension network, Ag Extension, which really allows us to get across the state and serve the citizens of the state, and kind of bringing that educational component across the state is how we view our mission. So I think both schools have just kind of a really strong tie to helping the people of the state.
So maybe,
and if just to add on to that, so where the School of Mines aspect shows up in our programs is that geology is part of our College of Engineering and Mines, along with geological engineering. we later added petroleum engineering, and you could argue that chemical engineering is part of that same suite of programs that are all connected originally back to the School of Mines.
So why don't we keep going here with what is common across the two universities from engineering programs, and what is unique in each university, and then maybe broader. UND has the law school, has the medical school. NDSU is very ag-centric in terms of deeply within the state through the extension. So start with like common and these terms like School of Mines or land grant. I mean, they predate what there was no electrical engineering, when so there was, and it was electrical engineering before there was even a transistor, and now it constitutes much more than coils of wire and transformers. But I digress. Common engineering programs, and let's also add engineering and computer science. Is there a consensus around calling it computational sciences, or is it really all over the map? Because it seems like they're often grouped together, but we want to make sure we're inclusive here. Is it computer science, computational science? Do we have an agreement there across higher ed?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But
okay.
I'd like to use computational sciences because it includes computer science, but also cybersecurity, data science. So,
IT, maybe.
IT.
And then when you talk about data science, now you got to get the statisticians in there too. So you get into some of. I mean, domain knowledge evolves like this, and sometimes more emergent, if you will, newer domains often have multiple mothers. Success has many mothers. So when I'm saying engineering, or when we say engineering, if we don't remember, it's broader than that typically.
Very much.
Sort of applied STEM, but not biological. But give it enough time, there's actually sort of a kind of biological engineering, different from there's biomedical. Maybe we can talk about that. But down the road in 10 years, now that AI has basically solved all the protein folding things, people are building up an engineering discipline around biological stuff at the cellular level. So who knows what will constitute a full range of engineering programs in the future. But common mechanical for both.
Yep.
Right.
Electrical for both. Computer science for both.
Civil
for both. Other is there an IT BS or a cyber BS? Those I know they're new in some places, but
we're launching a bachelor's in cybersecurity.
So we'll have that in common.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then is there a data science and that belongs in the college, or is that a program that's multiple colleges, or is that still evolving? Let's start with
Data science in our college is all contained within the College of Engineering and Mines.
Okay.
So, and it's part of our School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science.
Okay.
So we started that program about 6 years ago, at the same time that we formed the school and the same time that we started the cybersecurity program.
Okay, cool. And I think data science at NDSU is a combined program.
So at NDSU, our data science, which is new, will be launched next year officially, but it's a little bit broader. So it includes a component from our College of Arts and Sciences and more focused on statistics. And there was also a component that will be part of the College of Business and our Management Information System.
Right.
So it's a collaboration here between 3 colleges.
Okay, and then watch your mic. Bring your mic a little bit closer. When you turn your head from me, it cuts a little bit. Any other specific programs within engineering or computational science that are available at both universities?
At the grad level, biomedical engineering.
Biomedical, and that's kind of a joint program?
It is.
Yeah.
It started as a joint program. It's a great example of collaboration between our 2 schools, and it continues today. I think it's probably been 6 years or so.
It's 6, 7 years. I agree. It is a great example of how we actually can work together.
Yeah.
And,
So there's certain requirements built in the program where students need to have part of their committee from both schools.
Right.
There's a joint biomedical engineering symposium we hold every year. We alternate locations. And it's a great opportunity for the students, faculty, and the industry partners to get together and talk about issues and get to know each other better. So, I think that's a basis for even further collaboration that we'd love to see.
Cool. I love hearing that. And then we won't break it into all the details, but I assume that like at the master's and the PhD level, some of that commonality continues, and in some cases, there's maybe PhDs that you can get at one school and not at the other within, and maybe there's a broader like general engineering PhD, but maybe not a specific discipline. But unless you think it's relevant to point it out, I'd like to talk about like differences. So you get a chemical engineering degree at UND and not NDSU. I think most that's like the first thing people think of. But what are the other unique degrees that are only UND specific?
Sure, geological engineering.
And what is that? Building things with rocks?
Yeah, to some extent. Before we started petroleum engineering, a lot of those graduates would go into petroleum, the oil and gas industry.
Mining, drilling.
Yeah. Okay. Those things in general. Yeah. So that's part of the Harold Ham School of Geology and Geological Engineering.
And then you said petroleum engineering?
Petroleum engineering.
That's a BS as well?
Yep, BS through PhD.
So there'd be like, I would imagine some domain knowledge within geological engineering, but otherwise it's like a whole bunch of extra technical information around oil exploration or natural gas or all petroleum.
Yeah, oil and gas exploration and production.
Sure.
Including like reservoir engineering and things that also are relevant to like carbon sequestration, for example, and other things. So it's you could broaden it to consider it more of like subsurface engineering.
Sure.
So yeah, that's a unique program at UND, and then also aerospace engineering,
right,
which we just started this year. That's housed in our Department of Mechanical Engineering. And then biomedical engineering at the undergraduate level is now in its second year. And I think that's probably it. So I'll take that
environmental?
Environmental engineering we have at the grad level.
Okay.
I believe NDSU has it.
We have it now at the undergraduate level.
And is that separate from like a civil engineering degree, or is it like a civil engineering option? Or
no, so the environmental engineering program is housed within our civil construction and environmental engineering department. It is now a separate separate degree program. So it started as just an option or a concentration, but now it's grown into its own degree.
And one other I forgot to mention is energy engineering.
Right.
So we started a master's and PhD in energy engineering a number of years ago, and that's continued to grow. So all of those areas,
not a bachelor's,
not a bachelor's, although we're considering it.
Okay.
Issue is it's not a very well established degree program yet. So we've talked about this quite a bit with our Petroleum Engineering Advisory Board. There's a lot of challenges to recruiting in petroleum engineering. Just because students, even though there are tons of opportunities, and there will be for decades, still a lot of students are reluctant to go into petroleum engineering. They hear messages about fossil fuels going away and all of those things. So we need to figure out, this is one of our challenges, is how do we attract students into that program, because we need to fill the need in industry. One approach was to potentially broaden that to energy engineering, but also incorporate some other sources of energy.
Sure.
The issues there are primarily like, what does that degree mean? All of these other programs that we mentioned are fairly well established. So if you're an employer and you're hiring a environmental engineer or a chemical engineer or whatever, you generally know what skills they're going to have, right? Energy engineering is still not as well defined. So we're considering an undergraduate degree to complement but not replace the petroleum engineering degree, but not quite there yet.
Yeah, to anyone that is thinking that petroleum engineering or drilling is going to go away anytime soon. I mean, we're all three engineers here, so life is about practical problems and solving them. So setting aside the argument around the goals, and green technology is its own thing, but the idea that we're going to be able to supplant petroleum in any reasonable person's career projection.
Right.
Not with known, not in any interpolative space yet. Major breakthroughs would have to occur, and the rate of adoption of breakthroughs, they start out in the lab, and they and they start really expensive, and they typically take decades. So I would say anyone who is interested in exploring that probably has pretty good career runway left.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, carbon sequestration, managing those reservoirs.
Sure.
Those are things that petroleum engineers learn how to do. Geothermal engineering.
Right. So both those are green, and both those involve drilling and fluids and
absolutely.
Okay. Are there any other unique programs?
No, I think I'd listed them all, but the other point is that they all take advantage of other strengths that we have across campus. So energy engineering has really strong ties to our Energy and Environmental Research Center, which is our largest research unit on campus. Biomedical engineering collaborates quite a bit with our med school. The aerospace engineering program is actually a joint program with our School of Aerospace. And so what I like about that program is our students will be taking some of the same classes as the aviation students, and they'll be taking at least 3 or 4 classes in the School of Aerospace. So learning fundamentals of flight, working on projects directly with future pilots and folks in the space studies program over there will have a lot of advantages. So
under the ground and above the ground.
Yeah. And in space.
Yeah, and in
space.
A
big part of aerospace engineering is the astronautics part of things. And so we've got a lot of things going on. We can get into it later, but all around satellites on campus and around Grand Forks. So we're taking advantage of that as well.
And then NDSU, unique programs.
Yeah, so several others. So I kind of mentioned the agricultural tie. So we've got a agricultural and biosystems engineering program, which is actually housed within the College of Agriculture. So they kind of have a split type of duty there. So that's one of the different programs. We've also got industrial and manufacturing engineering, and which is unique to NDSU relative to UND. And industrial engineering is, I think, a very high in demand program. It's one of our smaller programs in terms of student numbers, but huge demand because it really gets more into the industry side. I mean, it's more of a little bit more focus on business and people. You get into things like operational efficiency, business operations, management, human factors, those types of things. And then they also, there's a industrial engineering degree and then separately a manufacturing engineering degree, which is all about, okay, you got a part design, how are we going to build it? How are we going to manufacture it? And so there's a very practical aspect to industrial and manufacturing.
I'll interject on something from like Elon Musk has pointed out many times that really relates to industrial and manufacturing engineering, is the amount of effort and the amount of humans involved to make a prototype, like the Cybertruck. The Cybertruck was unveiled quite a long time ago, and it only went into production now because the effort to actually design the factory in a way that you could afford it, which at least at the abstraction layer of how are we putting everything together and how do we make money doing it would be the industrial and manufacturing engineering. But they're putting together pieces that are themselves like steel processing because of stainless, which would have had material science and mechanical engineering in. But I mean, the industrial engineering itself is critical to making anything successful.
Absolutely.
And it's above and beyond than the design of the actual thing. So to design the factory is itself a thing, often the more expensive, more difficult thing, if you want to reach the volumes where you can afford it. So
I could put in a plug for industrial engineering as well. I don't know if you remember when we were at our previous employer.
I do.
We hired an industrial engineering intern from NDSU, and I didn't know much about industrial engineering, to be honest. None of the schools that I went to had that as a degree, but I was really impressed with the range of skills that person had, and just thinking about the design of the factory, the layout, the flow of materials. They seem to get a lot of Lean Six Sigma type training as well. And
that's correct.
A lot of business process overlap with it,
Yeah.
and because you're tied, the factory's tied very deeply to whether you make money or not,
Right.
and your objectives on making improvements are often related to reducing scrap, improve the quality or improve throughput, reduce the amount of costs. That's and so you're typically a lot closer tied to the immediate bottom line, top line and bottom line of the organization. So if you love engineering but you also love business, that's a nice crossover. Other things at NDSU that's unique there?
As part of our civil program, we also offer construction engineering and construction management. 2 separate degrees. One is an engineering degree, so a little bit more on the technical side. And then the construction management program, which is not an engineering degree, but tied very closely, obviously, to the construction engineering program. But construction managers would be more like the industrial engineers of the manufacturing world or the industrial world. They get more into on building projects, the cost estimating, the scheduling, the management side of construction projects. So again, both highly needed, highly in demand.
Okay, and then there's a new program that's between the electrical and computer engineering and computer science group.
Yep, and that's software engineering. And yeah, I think you described it pretty well. It kind of fits the spectrum if you look at from pure hardware design on the electrical side, pure hardware design to pure programming, which goes from electrical engineering to computer science. You've got in between, you've got computer engineering, which is probably a little closer to the electrical engineering side, more design with computer hardware and a bit of the programming side. And then software engineering, which kind of fills that gap between sort of the basic programming and the science of computer science, and then the engineering and application side. So again, a lot of high-end demand from our local companies looking for specifically software engineers. So that one is a new start for us. And in fact, we'll already be graduating. Our first graduate will come out within the next year.
So that for people that are trying to understand, like we're computer engineering, software engineering, computer science, if you're writing an application for, say, a mobile app for your phone, and you want to make the next, I was going to say Angry Birds. Does anyone even remember Angry Birds anymore?
I love that game.
All 3 of us do. Some kids listening, what the heck is Angry Birds? So if you're writing an application and it's all about the interface and the function, that might be able to be done entirely with what you'd learn in computer science. But if, say, one of the functions is really computationally expensive, which is to say it uses up a lot of the processor and it slows everything down, and you want to be also running like your location or something else and some video, then you might have to get into optimization, in which case you actually need to kind of know the hardware of the phone or the computer at this point. And that's where you start to get into that crossover where the knowledge of the actual hardware and how the hardware can make performance constraints on your software. If you can think of it like as a stack, and up top is the thing that the user is interacting with, and all the way down at the bottom are these gates and voltage levels, which eventually becomes ones and zeros. But within electrical engineering, computer engineering, and software engineering, in computer science, you've got kind of like that whole spectrum, depending on where your affinity is.
Yeah.
And some of it might be, so your affinity and your competence, you want to find that overlap, right, between your affinity, which is to say the stuff that you like, and competence, or at least competence potential. Like you think you could get good at this, or you kind of have a knack for it. And then where there's an actual demand for that. Sure.
Right.
That's that trifecta. You're trying to maximize that overlap in that Venn diagram. And too many things are, I really, really love it, and I might not be that good at it, and there's a million other people wanting to do it. Like, I want to be a pro athlete or something like that. But
Todd, are we allowed to ask each other questions?
No. Go right ahead.
I'm just curious. So you start a software engineering program. Where is that housed within your departments? And then what did you think about?
I thought you were going to ask me a question. It's like I've known you a long time. There's no telling where that might go, but by all means.
Yeah, no, good question, because it's a collaborative effort between electrical and computer engineering and computer science. The software engineering degree program is actually housed in computer science.
Okay.
It is not accredited. Obviously, it's a new program, and whether we choose to get it accredited, ABET accredited, which I think is on the plan, but that'll remains to be seen, because our computer science does not have the same accreditation like as our engineering.
Would it be accredited through EAC or CAC?
I believe through EAC, because it is an engineering discipline. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask is it's something I'm almost always wrestling with, is just how do we structure our departments? So, 6 years ago now, we moved computer science into the College of Engineering. It was in a different part of campus, and we formed
which
this.
Pretty much parallels what we did about the same time frame. Yeah.
But we merged it with electrical engineering to try to capture the hardware and software side of things and take advantage of synergies between those two. And then that's also the home of data science and cybersecurity. But, I'm constantly thinking about whether that makes sense, whether our current structure makes sense. Like I mentioned biomedical engineering. It was started by some electrical engineering faculty members. Yeah. And I think it's probably even at NDSU, it's very EE heavy. Now we've moved it out of that school, and it's kind of a standalone program under the dean's office. And it's grown, especially now that we have an undergraduate program, and there's a lot of discussion about should it be its own department. And, there are some advantages to having it be its own department. There's some disadvantages. Departments inherently have boundaries, and there's maybe it encourages some thinking about, this is mine, trying to think of things in more of a zero-sum way than I would like. And biomedical engineering is so interdisciplinary that I want it to be able to collaborate seamlessly with mechanical engineering and biomechanics, with ME and Chemi on materials and those kind of things. And so what I wrestle with is, does it make sense for it to be its own department, or is it better off as a standalone program? And it's similar with energy engineering, which is pretty interdisciplinary, and those kind of things. So that's why I asked that question.
You're getting into the next thing, which is what exactly do deans do? This is
we think about these types of things.
So and one of the follow-ups would be that how easy is it to actually just, hey, we should really merge these two things, remove these two things, because it seems to me there's an awful lot of stakeholders in higher ed. But let's lay the ground. I'm honestly interested in hearing what does a dean do? Like inward-facing, outward-facing problems. What do you, if you had to make that job description? We'll start with Alan. What is your first pass of a job description of a dean, and then is anything specific to a dean of engineering and computational science? But start. What's a dean?
What is a dean? Great question. And it's, maybe I'll start with thinking, because Brian came up through a similar kind of path of being a department chair, right? And department chair, it seemed like, your objectives, your mission was probably a little more straightforward, right? You had a department you wanted to take care of, and so you oversaw the curriculum, you oversaw the research, but it was about, gaining resources and, kind of focusing and fighting on your department, your program. So it was kind of clear. Stepping up to dean now, it suddenly becomes a lot broader, right? Is that now you can't just think about one program. You got to understand what's best for the college. And so when you think about resource allocation, how do I distribute my resources?
You're talking about money among other things,
and equipment and labor and positions, faculty lines and staff lines, and all comes down to money. But you've got to be a lot more strategic in your thinking and understand, where can I get the most bang for the buck? Where's my best ROI going to be when I make an investment? And so sometimes you're going to make friends in doing that, and sometimes you won't.
Let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
You're a dean of a college.
Yep.
As part of a university. So what is a college then? If you're the dean, you're in charge of the college, and then there's a bunch of colleges in the university. is that the normal taxonomy, and what does that mean? Like what are the decision rights of someone that's a dean of a college that you're responsible for? Like fundamentally, what are you responsible for?
Yeah, good question, because I think a lot of people don't really understand that academic structure, because in many ways it is unique. So
you guys just did a bunch of ABCD of accreditation stuff.
We
which
did.
Is good for
what does that mean?
But
yeah, so at the base level, you've got programs, academic programs, which would be like a major, a collection of courses that defines a major. And then you've got a department, right? And a department might consist of one program, like in our case, mechanical engineering. A department might consist of multiple programs, like in our case, civil, construction, and environmental engineering. So the department level, though, is how most, I think, faculty associate, many students associate with the particular department that they're enrolled in. A college then represents a collection of departments. And so in our case, it would be our engineering departments plus our computer science department. And then a step up then is the university, which represents a collection of colleges. So at NDSU, we now have 5 academic colleges. And so those are the College of Agriculture, the College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Health and Human Sciences, College of Engineering, College of Business. And so we are, at the dean's level, we're each responsible for those departments, those programs that make up our respective colleges. So we are kind of, just like as a department chair where you're trying to advocate for your own programs and your own faculty, we're doing that at the college level. It's just that we have a much broader base that we're responsible for as opposed to a department chair level.
Anything that you'd add to the description of a?
No, I think that's a great description. Ultimately, we're responsible for all the finances in the college, all the other resources, space. Space is always a contentious issue.
Yes.
There's a lot of stakeholders that all are, that you have to interact with all the time.
Let's talk about that a little bit, the inward facing versus outward facing.
Sure. Yeah,
some stakeholders. Who are your bosses, direct and indirect?
There's a lot of them.
That's a very good question.
I think about like the university presidents and how many, indirect bosses they have. How many stakeholders that intersection point is.
Right.
In the community, within the organization itself, and then within the alumni and within the community. But
certainly the president has much wider responsibilities. But I do feel the job of a dean is a major intersection point between all of these stakeholders as well. Any student in our college who has an issue, they might start with a department chair, but ultimately all those issues come to me. Same with faculty and staff.
But you would only get the really snarly problems that they couldn't resolve, right? I mean,
usually the easy ones are handled at the
once
chair
they
level.
finally get to your level of like maybe a student a professor grievance about something. By the time it gets to you guys, and then it's not easy. So good fun.
Yeah, you deal with the most challenging things, and then from the other perspective, and anytime somebody across the university needs something from our college or wants to be connected with something in our college or needs information about the college, it all comes to the dean. And so a lot of the job of the dean is just directing the flow of information, I guess. I'm sure your email is like mine. It's just unrelenting, constant emails, and maybe half of them are things that I actually have to deal with versus redirecting it to the appropriate person. But then you've got my boss is the provost, the vice president for academic affairs, but certainly they're not technically my boss, but we have people at the Alumni Foundation, people in facilities and student affairs and
so what is
academic.
The relationship with the Alumni Foundation? What's the dean's what's the role there? What do you got to do? We're
the chief fundraiser for the college.
To me, that's a big deal. I'm like,
it is a big deal,
and I know how much time you guys spend on it. So if you want to be a good dean, you need to be able to handle the complexity, be willing to let the buck stop for here, for certain, at least for certain things. But you also have a sort of a sales element of it in a sense.
Very much so.
You're you're the face of your college.
Yes.
And some, alumni or friends, including corporations, sometimes they write very large checks. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't.
Right.
And so what does that side of it, the community facing side, the donor facing side, what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. I mean, sometimes it's just individual meetings with alumni. They're in town and they want to tour a campus and they want to talk to somebody in engineering about what's going on in the college, what our major initiatives are, what's our vision for the future. Those kind of one-on-one things. We do a lot of those things via Zoom now too. I have a lot of meetings. Mm-hmm. We were very productive during COVID, just getting in front of donors and engaging with them. And I was surprised by how successful that was, but people adjusted pretty quickly to doing things that way. And then there are our events, that we host both on campus and around the country. The deans are usually asked to come and give an update on the college and, present a positive image of the college that we're growing, we're working on big challenges, we're helping solve problems, we're doing important things. And then, those generally are the main fundraising things, and just establishing what the priorities are. Donors you have your own priorities, of course, like I want to accomplish this and this, but, a lot of it is just talking to donors long enough to really understand what motivates them. And sometimes there's an overlap between what they're interested in funding and what you want funded. Sometimes there's not, but they're the ones writing the checks. They're the ones, investing in things that they're passionate about. And so part of the job is just figuring out how do we take their interest and their resources and make it have the highest impact.
So when I'm sure we all know the joke when two engineers are talking, how do you tell which one's the extroverted one?
Looks at your shoes versus your own shoes.
That's looking at the other person's shoes. Seems like if you want to be the dean of a college of engineering, you need to be able to look people in the eye, and you need to be comfortable with that. And as we both all uncomfortably look at you in the eye,
that's obviously an old stereotype, and some of the
built on a little bit of truth.
A little bit, yeah, but some of the most outgoing, gregarious people I know are engineers, and so it's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's not for everybody, but I think Brian has described it pretty well. I think this is probably an area that the external side that has really grown in importance and time commitment. I would say, looking at what my predecessors did for external engagement versus how much time I spend, I think because. As Brian kind of alluded to, so much more of our ability to succeed and achieve our vision requires funding beyond what we are able to get from the state and from tuition revenue. State support, just as a percentage of our budget, has backed off, and so in order to be successful, we really need that private support, whether it's scholarships for students to help build our enrollments, whether it's funding to help us recruit faculty, whether it's funding to build a new building or to gain equipment and other resources. We rely a lot on donors, and donors might be alumni. Donors might be the companies that hire our graduates that have a vested interest in making sure that we succeed and have that pipeline of engineers coming out the door. So, as Brian said, so much of what we now need to do is articulate that vision and show that how, our goals are going to help achieve the success that they even want, and trying to align what we are doing with what their needs and wants are.
To any, say, faculty that might be listening or watching to this, I can attest, having been at many donor events, where you or other deans have been present, and some with you. It's not a trivial undertaking in terms of the amount of human engagement.
Yes.
And I mean you need to establish credible trust and find that shared. What is that shared vision with either a corporate partner or an alum, how can you make that happen in a win-win way. And there's only so much money that's coming from the tax base. There's only so much money that can come from tuition because you're trying to be an affordable public university, and the donor community is absolutely critical to the sustainability and success and growth. And it's a big deal, and it takes a lot of nights, weekends, and dinners, and putting up with people like me who ask if you guys would sit down and talk, and this is part of that outward-facing thing, and appreciate it. There's been some success, certainly, and a lot of the success involves names on buildings, and got some buildings coming up, right? Some much-needed engineering buildings. I am a graduate. My undergrad is electrical engineering at NDSU, and that I am told there are some fans of the round building. That was old when I went to university and for undergrad, and that would have been back in the early 90s. That was to me a very brutal architecture, unique but brutal and not very functional, it seemed. So I will be counted among the people that will cheer when we do when the wrecking ball hits that. Like, I've seen the renderings of the new building; it looks fantastic. I want to talk just a little bit about the new building, the time frame, and how we made it possible. And then there's a building coming from UND, so I want to hear from Brian as well. Yeah.
No, I think that's really exciting. Both institutions are looking at expanding our facilities for our engineering majors. So at NDSU, we're in the process now of designing. We're kind of in the final stages of the design of the new engineering facility, which will be named the Richard Offerdahl 65 Engineering Complex. Yes, Richard Offerdahl, an electrical engineering alum, and just a huge, generous benefactor and donor to our college, and made an extremely generous gift of $25 million, the lead gift, for the new engineering complex. And basically what this is going to do is just give us a lot more space and a lot more modern facilities for our students to work. And as you alluded to, the engineering complex is aged. It served us well, built mostly in the 60s with very little additional space added to it since that time. So this really represents the first major kind of renovation or expansion of facilities at NDSU. With a few exceptions, we will be keeping most of the existing buildings. The one exception, of course, being the round building, which was the administration building. But the new facility will replace that. It will actually connect all of the existing buildings together into one, so we'll all be able to say we're under one roof. We're going to bring our ag and biosystems engineering faculty into the complex, adding a lot of teaching lab space, some student commons, student interaction space, and a large maker space, which is going to be an area for all of our students, all of our different disciplines to be able to go in and work on their projects. And we talk a lot about our hands-on kind of opportunities for our engineers. This is where they're going to be able to do that, creating and building and assembling and testing of their designs. So I think it's really going to be a premier facility that will add a lot of openness, a lot of modernness.
And winter hamster tubes.
And winter hamster tubes,
yes. I was always under the impression UND was a little bit ahead of NDSU for the hamster tubes.
Yeah, we've been chasing UND on this one for a long time, but we're going to have a couple of skywalks that will connect to the pharmacy Aldeveron Tower on the north side and the Union on the south side. So the students seem to be the most excited about the skywalks going in. But it's going to be a great facility, really a student-focused facility. Being able to have dedicated lab space both for teaching and for research separate would be a big deal. Having that collaborative space. Yes.
Having it. Bringing ag engineering was kind of isolated. Having them integral with ag tech and where that's going.
Yeah, because there's so much opportunity for collaboration with our other engineering disciplines, and we've always been able to collaborate. But when you've got departments that are separated by buildings, that doesn't just facilitate kind of that natural collaboration that can occur when you bump into folks at the water cooler type thing. So,
Right.
so bringing people into one facility, we think is going to spur some additional ideas, and I think it's going to help both our teaching function, the opportunities we can provide for our students, but it's also going to help our research function as we're able to now go back and repurpose a lot of our existing laboratories for more research-focused needs. So it's really going to help both of our missions on teaching and
And you
research.
started the demolition of what was the ag engineering building, correct?
That's correct. The
Not
Ag and
much of
Biosystems
that
Engineering
left
building
yet.
is almost completely leveled.
When does the first wrecking ball swing for the round?
For the round building,
Yeah.
it will be sometime in June of this year.
And then when is the expected completion date where students be able to
So
utilize this?
our goal on the construction timeline is to be occupying the new facility for fall of 2026. So we're looking at a 2-year build cycle. We start new construction this fall and hopefully complete in 2026. There'll also be quite a bit of renovation of some of our existing buildings as well. So the gift that was provided by Mr. Offerdahl is allowing us to do a little bit more than what we had originally planned, and also to accelerate that construction timeline, which was kind of a major requirement by Mr. Offerdahl. He said, I want to see this thing get built, so get her done.
So that the legislators from the taxpayers are committing a sizable amount, provided there was concomitant, whatever the word is,
Matching funds.
matching funds
Yeah.
from private. And
That's correct.
fantastic.
The legislature led the way for both institutions. Phenomenal. I think what the legislature and the governor did for higher ed in this session, providing really that level of commitment to our engineering, our science, and STEM disciplines. But yes, there was the expectation that there would be the universities had to come up with about 30% of the total cost in private match.
And so it's my understanding that the UND building is a little different. You want to talk about that?
Sure, I'll give a little bit of history. First of all, it was interesting to hear Alan talk about their project, and a lot of the motivation is the same. I would say that our existing facilities are comparable to NDSU. They were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Most of that space has not been renovated since, and the way we use that space has changed quite a bit. We have a lot more students than we did back then. We're doing research that was never even imagined when those buildings were built. So we've kind of retrofitted a lot of old labs and things like that. And so things are far from optimal. And if I could give a little bit of the history. So when I've been dean, as I said, for about 5 years, shortly after I became dean, we started a master planning process for the college and hired a firm to kind of survey our existing facilities, talk to all of our departments about their needs and their projections for the future, and developed a couple of options for some mix of renovations and new construction. Around the same time, the university's master plan was evolving, and there's a space on campus currently occupied by a large field house. It's called Hislop. That building, I think, was built in the 50s, and the plan is to demolish that building. And so the timing for our project depends on that demolition. And so it also houses the only pool in the city of Grand Forks that the high schools use, the only competition type pool.
Okay.
And not the only pool, but it's the one that the high schools rely on, and swim clubs and so on. And so the university gave them through next spring, so the spring of 25 will be the last swim season in there, and then the building will be demolished. And so all of that is happening. And about 2 years ago, we got more serious about this project. And I remember I made a presentation to the Alumni Foundation, just making the case for why we need new facilities to accommodate our growth, to continue to attract students and retain students, and all of the same reasoning that went into the NDSU building. And so that was May of 22. And after that, the university prioritized that as its number one priority. And so there was really a two-phase plan to build, first an engineering building and then what they're calling a STEM building, because there was also need in our College of Arts and Sciences.
As part of the same broader building?
Same, on that same site where Hislop is. Because there's the same story in chemistry and math and physics. They needed some space. And so we went into the last legislative session with kind of this multi-phase plan, and they funded the first phase of it, a very similar amount to the NDSU project. So in our case, $57.4 million. Our share of it is $25 million. And then we'll be going into the next session trying to get funding for phase 2. About a year ago, so after that was approved, I started thinking about what this building should be. And I felt that if we build just an engineering building that would eventually be attached to a math and science building, we'd be missing a really great opportunity to do something different. And so what's evolved over the last year is this vision for what we call the STEM complex. And it's really meant to be an integrated math, science, and engineering building. So as you know, engineering students take a lot of their classes in math, chemistry, and physics. They're in a different college technically, but I really wanted to get them all under the same roof and have a building where students would have access to all of the classes that they take typically in their first couple of years, all of the student support services, advising, tutoring, all of that kind of stuff, have access to collaborative space for student projects and all of those things, and really make it a hub for all of the math, science, and engineering students. You know, those students tend to spend a lot of time on campus, and they need a kind of a home on campus where they're going to set up for the day and go to their classes, but also have a lot of time to work on homework and projects and collaborate and those types of things. So at the same time, I also want that to be the home for most of our faculty. And so, you know, this building should house most of our engineering departments, with the exception of a couple that have some more renovated space. But also we hope to get as many folks from those other departments in there in either the first or second phase as well. So that's the overall vision, is more of an integrated math, science, and engineering facility. And the first phase will be connected with skywalks to our other existing buildings. So we'll
hamster tubes are good.
Definitely adding to the skywalk infrastructure on campus. In fact, there's something really interesting going on the other side of Columbia Road, just on the edge of campus. There's a couple of new buildings that are built using a public-private partnership, where a private developer has come in, built a facility that will house, in this case, our athletics department, but also have several stories of apartments. And then the second project just on the adjacent block, similar apartments on the upper floors and some retail on the lower floors. All of these will be connected as well via skywalk to the new STEM complex. So conceivably somebody could live in an apartment across the street and make their way during the winter all the way through the skywalks.
I can't tell you how many times as a delicate little undergrad walking from T-Lot, to all the way to the engineering buildings, I just wished there was some Uber donor out there who suffered through the same thing that I did, or I fantasized someday I'll be the Uber donor. It'll just come in to put the hamster tubes all over the place. Mm-hmm. Now I'm into cold immersion and other stuff, so it's not most people, but it's not about me.
Occasionally you'll run into a donor who is like, I had to walk in 50 below weather. And our students
against
are
the
getting
wind,
soft.
both
We're getting
ways.
soft on our students.
So we're about a year behind, largely because of the Hislop.
Who knew that a swimming pool would be a constraint? But that's one of the engineering problems. You identify your requirements. What are the constraints?
That's right.
Universities serve a lot of purposes for their communities, and so that's one that we had to work around. And so we're looking at a fall 27 opening.
Well, it's great news for both universities, both communities. And since we're talking about good things, for balance, let's talk about problems. Headwinds, structural headwinds in higher ed. Seems like we've got a number of them. It seems like we're in kind of a reevaluation in America around what what is the value proposition of higher ed? Seems like we maybe got over our skis a little bit on people with student loans for degrees that maybe weren't the pathways to the types of jobs that would actually pay back the loans, kind of thing. The one thing about engineering, it sure seems to me, is it's very much fixed towards real problems and real jobs. And I do want to, as we talk about the problems, maybe shift then to the why engineering is still a wonderful route from a job prospects. But let's talk just a little bit about this, the overall headwinds that face universities that are also affecting your guys' colleges. So start with Alan.
Yeah, sure. No, I think I think you alluded to something there when we talk about the enrollment challenges, the headwinds, because this is a national problem. The difficulties or challenges we're facing is what many universities are facing regionally, nationally. But one of those revolves around this national narrative on the value of a four-year degree. And because we've all heard the stories of, students who rack up, significant student loan debt and then can't find, good paying jobs. And so then it paints this picture that we're taking their money and not giving them anything that's going to pay off. And I think that's a very unfortunate narrative, because I don't think that in many of our cases that exists. But we see it here locally. Part of that challenge also really is related to the economy and the need, I would say the overall shortage of labor throughout the market. In this state, in this region, nationally, we need people who are in the trades. So you need people with the 2-year degrees, or even there's great paying jobs out there that you can do right out of high school. And so, convincing a high school student to go back to school for 4 more years when they can look at a pretty big paycheck right off the bat, that's a hard sell. And so I think we all know that the value of that will be there. It will show up down the road. The overall earning power and earning potential of a 4-year college graduate far exceeds that of a non-college graduate. And so making that case and convincing students that, yes, the sacrifice is going to be worth it has gotten a little bit tougher because of the labor market, the job market. That's just one of the challenges. Overall, nationally, there's a decline, or there's an upcoming decline in the number of high school graduates. And we talk a lot about this problem called the cliff, the enrollment cliff, which really begins in about 2026, which is 18 years after 2008, which was the recession, and the number of births declined at that point in time.
A shift in the slope.
The slope
birth rates
of the number of available high school graduates nationally will decline. Now, interesting point, though, North Dakota is not experiencing that trend. We're actually projecting an increase in the number of high school graduates. But the population of North Dakota is very small. Many of our students come from neighboring states, in particular Minnesota. And so we have to look more regionally when we talk about what will that impact of the decline in high school graduates. So I think we're all institutions are going to be fighting over a smaller pool of students, and so you're seeing that impact on many institutions. Some institutions are feeling it more than others. So. Those are a couple of the challenges we face. Many more. I'm sure Brian can elaborate on
anything you want to add?
Challenges.
Yeah, I think exactly the same issues are at the top of my mind all the time. As Alan mentioned earlier, that the state has been very generous to the universities, but most of our revenue comes from tuition. So we're very tuition dependent, meaning we're very enrollment dependent, and so these demographic issues are certainly a challenge. We're going to be facing more and more competition. We have our neighbor to the east trying to hang on to as many of their students as possible. So not only are our enrollment numbers going to be potentially down, but I think the days of double-digit increases in tuition are far behind us as well. So we're not going to be able to increase tuition to maintain revenue.
Right. No, that will drive. That's part of the value prop. Is the very, there's a cool graphic of like the things that have inflated versus deflated over the past 20 years, and like healthcare and education have gone way, way up, while a number of things that are sort of tech driven or and also where the regulatory environments aren't quite as fixed as healthcare and higher ed, where you have a lot more gatekeeping, a lot more credentialing required. But the cost of higher ed is certainly part of the value proposition, and figuring out how to innovate and how to do more with less. And is there a way in which we could see a future where tuition could come down, or at least the total cost of tuition? We're seeing that you talked about the trades, but there's also this trend towards micro-credentials, this reevaluating the value of a four-year degree, but at the same time, you guys have the domain knowledge, you guys have the experts, you're literally machines to teach. So what are the credentials that are of value? And I know that the certificate programs have been growing quite a bit, and it seems like everybody's leaning into that. Nobody exactly knows what the balance is supposed to be, but everybody seems to be on board of it's not just four-year degrees, and what is it that, where are the jobs, and how do we bring in the students, and how do we balance everything? So tough challenges, tough decisions for deans, especially with when things shrink. If things shrink 5%, that's no big deal. Well, that's a big deal, because especially if you shrink 5% and you just shrinked 5%, say a little while ago, you are already as lean as you could be. Now you have to figure out how to do more with less. What aren't you going to fill if somebody retires, and a lot of interesting challenges that way that isn't going away. However, we have a lot of upside potential, perhaps, with a lot of trepidation on AI and like things like competency-based assessments and new innovations in that space. I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Like, where do we see, certainly online education, and whether, prior to COVID, UND had embraced online learning quite a bit. We're quite a bit ahead of NDSU and neighboring places. And then COVID hit, and everybody, their neighbor and their dog was online. But what, let's start with that question. Engineering is different. Got a lot of calculus. You got a lot of math. How do you look at online schooling and the challenges of an engineering degree? What are the things that we're confident in terms of the future viability of that platform, and what are areas that we know that we need to keep adapting? I'll start with Brian.
Sure. Yeah. As you said, we've been doing online or distance engineering education for a long time. I think our program started in 1989. It was originally it was called the Corporate Engineering Program, and it was a program that we set up in partnership with a large employer in the Twin Cities who wanted to provide their technicians a way to get an engineering degree. And so it started off with the VHS tapes being sent back and forth, and all of those programs had an on-campus requirement. So we have 1 to 2 week really intensive lab experiences on campus. So a student in, say, chemical engineering still has to come to campus a couple of times to do a lot of their lab experiments over the summer, and then they might spend the rest of the summer writing their reports and doing data analysis, that kind of thing. So that's obviously evolved to being now online delivery, but we still have an on-campus requirement for most of our programs. Where we've gotten away from it is in computer science, which you can do a lot of that. You can do all of that online. And electrical engineering has now moved fully online, and our students still have hands-on requirements, but you can buy kits and build circuits and test circuits and buy little data acquisition modules and do all kinds of the same things that you would do on campus. But most of those programs still have some on-campus requirements. So it's evolved over time. What I would say is that the population of students in those programs is fundamentally different than our on-campus students. Our on-campus students are traditional, 18 to 23-year-olds. The online students tend to be, they're working adults. They're working most of the time in some kind of technical role. They might be a technician, in a manufacturing company or something, and they want to get an engineering degree to move up in their career. And so some of the things that you really worry about making sure that you teach 18 to 22-year-olds, you don't worry as much about with these folks.
Oh, sure. So that's a big deal because they're, like, I can't imagine, my undergrad was electrical engineering, and that was before the internet. And, I can't imagine going through that online in terms of where I was.
Right. Me neither.
But if you're if you're working in a corporate role, and if you're working for corporate America or maybe a small tech venture or whatever, but you're immersed in the practical domain knowledge of whatever it is, the product or processes you're using. You might. Maybe you work at a ag processing facility and or an ethanol plant, and you've really nerded out about how all these fermentation stuff works, and you've got the valves all worked out and how the controls work, and now you're super passionate about chemical engineering. You at least have the context, and you have the additional domain knowledge to nest all this calc coming at you, because to me the math part of it is a challenge for the majority of students. And then there's what the hell is this for? Like myself for undergrad, what the hell is this for was a reoccurring thing, and I couldn't exactly Google it. And sometimes I had professors that were very good at contextualizing it, and then sometimes I had professors that, and they're who I'm bitching about isn't currently teaching, so that they wrote the book as well. I don't understand what this stuff is. This is math. I don't know why the math matters, and the instructor actually wrote the book. So I mean, no idea what to do with it. But if I'm mid-career and maybe I'm a technician, maybe I went in through sales or something else, but I have the nerd gene, so to speak. That makes sense to me. Right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the soft skills that you really want students on campus to learn about teamwork, about communication, they're often they're working in teams already. They're giving presentations regularly. So it's a bit different.
But if you were, say, 18 and you had the ability to be brick and mortar, would it be a very strong recommendation if you want to go through an engineering program and make them and actually benefit the maximum from it, and you don't have team experience, you don't have domain knowledge from a workplace you're already at, it's all green fields to you, and maybe you can handle the math without the cohort, which is to say your fellow students, but would it still be a strong recommendation for those that can to do it in a brick and mortar experience?
I think the optimal experience for those students is on campus. But we also have to balance that with accessibility. And, a lot of students are working full time to pay their way through college, and the online programs offer a degree of flexibility that you can't get if you're purely an on-campus student. Most of those students would be kind of a mix. They take some courses on campus, but they would have the flexibility to take one or two courses online. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty common on our campus and probably at NDSU.
And so UND's engineering programs, a number of them are already fully online, correct? Yeah. But at NDSU, there's a couple of them that are coming online, and then a number of classes are online, right? Talk about that a little bit.
That's correct. I think NDSU were much more recent to the online game. UND, I'll give credit to, has been I'd say a national leader for a long time in online education, and hats off to what they've done. NDSU, we're getting into this field, recognizing that there are opportunities, and it makes sense in certain areas that we feel to do a little more online offering. I'd say pretty much all of our programs have a certain number of courses that are offered online. A few programs are now moving fully online as one of the options. So just this year, launching both electrical and computer engineering as having a fully online option, I think described very well as Brian did. Here's your kit of parts, and we'll do our lab virtually, because you can do that. And computer science and cybersecurity and data science and information technology, some of the new programs that are launching will have both an online as well as an in-person component. But yeah, I think your point is good, Todd. We've recognized or belief that in-person experience is really, especially for the traditional students, that those 18 to 22, 23-year-olds. We really encourage students to pursue the in-person experience. That hands-on, being in the lab, running the equipment, building their systems as part of their capstone design projects, and working as a team. That it's those soft skills that are, I think, more difficult to emulate online. And there are ways to do it, and we know that some institutions have created programs where you can do group work, and it is possible to do that online. But it certainly is the more tangible face-to-face experience, having students sitting together, working around a table, working on projects, is where we feel that the traditional education will continue to be predominantly where the space that we will be in. But we do recognize that, there are populations that can't fit that. And whether it's geographic or, life situation, that it's not always possible for somebody to relocate to Fargo or to Grand Forks to go to school for 4 years. So we need to be more flexible in our offerings. And so that is a way that we are trending.
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit here. North Dakota. I'm a big fan. Also a big fan of staying in North Dakota for education if you can. Let's talk a little bit about somebody listening here who's got a very bright student, and they're thinking that this person, they're going to get a really high ACT. They got great grades. Maybe they can go to a great school, whatever the hell that means. And I have strong opinions about this. What do you say to parents or prospective students that might think that North Dakota, staying in North Dakota and going to the university, either in Grand Forks or Fargo, might be second best for them, or maybe they're falling into that narrative. Start with Brian. What do you say to those prospective students or parents?
Well, if they're on campus for a visit, I would walk them over to our alumni academy, which is essentially our alumni hall of fame, and show them a few examples of our alums and what they've been able to do. We have alums who are extremely successful with their UND engineering degree. They've started companies. They've risen to be CEOs in private industry or in government. There's a degree from either UND or NDSU is a path to success, and it depends a lot more on you as an individual than where you go, in my opinion. So that's what I would share. And NDSU will have a building with a name of somebody who is a great example of that. Somebody who got an NDSU degree and is incredibly successful, made a $25 million gift. We have other similar examples on campus as well. That's if the ultimate goal is they want to be successful in life and in their careers, you don't need to go any further than North Dakota to do that. So and there's something to be said about being, a big fish in a small pond, so to speak. Not that we're a small pond necessarily, but going somewhere big because it sounds like a fancy name or something isn't always what's in somebody's best interest. So,
yeah, I agree completely with everything Brian said. And I'll add, all of our engineering programs are all accredited by the same agency that accredits every other engineering program in the U.S. And that ensures that what the education that we're offering meets those minimum requirements. And I'll say we exceed a lot of those minimum requirements. Mm-hmm. But I would say that the education you can get here on a technical side is every bit as good as what you might get at one of the top name schools nationally. I think, I get asked all the time, I know you do too, Brian, is like, why go to NDSU? What makes NDSU different from university of this or university of that? And I do think that a lot of it comes down to the student experience, and you're not a small fish in a big pond. Our faculty are there. I think we talk about being a student-focused university, and I think that's true. I think you're not just a number in our programs. The faculty get to know who you are. There are opportunities to engage in research with some of our faculty who are doing groundbreaking research of national and international recognition. And so the fact that you've just got more opportunities to be engaged, be connected to faculty, join in student organizations and participating on some of those extracurricular activities, and being more than just a number at a university, but a student at a class where the faculty member actually knows your name. And that's what you get in North Dakota, right? And I always say, I came here 29 years ago, didn't grow up here. My first time ever in North Dakota was when I interviewed for this job. And I knew nothing about Fargo. I knew nothing about NDSU or the state. I figured, well, I got the job offer. I'll take the job. I'll work here for 2, 3, 4 years, and then I'll move on to greener pastures. And I stayed because I like the people. I like the program. We have a kind of that family type of atmosphere that is just engaging and makes you want to stay. And the job opportunities here, the growth, the economic diversity in our state is, I think, kind of got some hidden gems around here that not a lot of people know about on a national scale. And that's why a lot of students come and they stay. 40% of students from Minnesota. So Minnesota residents that graduate, at least from NDSU, 40% of those take their first job in the state of North Dakota because they recognize the great opportunities and what we have to offer.
Right. Yeah, and many of them may have had no other reason to ever come to North Dakota if not for the education, and they discover what a great place it is and decide to put down roots here. Yeah. So
this is something I'm pretty passionate about, and I've been pretty good so far in this podcast and not going off and pontificating. Something I'm trying to train myself. Done really badly on some previous ones. But this is the one that I do want to riff about. If you are a very bright high school student, or you have a child that's very bright, you expect that they're going to get, fantastic ACT. They've got the nerd gene, so to speak. They want to be an engineer or a computer scientist. And maybe they graduate top or among the top of their high school class, and they get into MIT or Caltech or Stanford or whatever. If you get into MIT, the chances that you'll be in the bottom half of the class are 50%. By definition of a distribution, half of a distribution has to be on the bottom half or the top half. And you will go from feeling like the smartest person in the room and the top of your class to being a flip of a coin, 50% chance that you'll be the bottom half of the class. That is not always a non-trivial thing for people to deal with. In terms of feeling like maybe I'm not who I thought I was, and confidence impacts on young minds in those kinds of environments. That people should think about that. The other thing that's been studied is the opportunities that open up for people that are top performers. If you are a top performer in high school and you go into a university where you can be the top performer in that university, and you don't. Sometimes if you're smart, I mean, there's a certain self-regulation with being smart. If you're too smart, things are easy, and you sort of find an equilibrium of effort. But if you are somebody willing to continue to put in the effort to be excellent, and you are excellent at an undergraduate engineering education, doors open for you. If you want to get into undergraduate research and you are one of the top performers, and you have other soft skills as well, you will get opportunities to do undergraduate research. People will want to help you. You will be confident because your top performance will be recognized. People where you can actually track with numbers career outcomes, which would be like academics for one. You can look at how many papers they published, how many awards they've gotten. To some extent, you can look in engineering in terms of patents and that sort of thing. And the work that has been done, it looks pretty clear that if you're in the top 10% or whatever of whatever university you're in, you have a much, much higher probability of having a lot of papers if you become a scientist, having a lot of patents if you become an engineer, and that probability goes down. And so there's a strong argument for if you are a top performer, and if you have all the schools or an assortment of schools available to you, find the one where you think confidently you can be a top performer within that school, and make the most of it. Don't slack off. Put your heart and soul into it. The network you will develop, as well as the doors that will open, the opportunities that will be put in front of you, will typically be bigger and broader than if you were not the top performer, but in a so-called top performing school. So, to those folks listening that are thinking that your child, or if you're a student, that somehow going to school in North Dakota is not something that will give you the opportunities that a big school would, so-called big school. Think hard about that, because the numbers are pretty compelling. Find where you can be that big fish in the right, the biggest fish in whatever pond you can be in. But then there's everybody. There's the non-top performers. People, I struggled to get my engineering undergrad. The things were easy for me in high school, and then all of a sudden, hey, this calculus is not something I can just wing. The one other thing I'd want to talk about here is what is happening to make the engineering education less of a cut filter. Mm-hmm. I mean, to some extent, hey, you got to get through the calc, and then it's more calc, calc and applied calc. And it serves as a cut filter to figure out if you survive through that, you have certain marketable skills. And when you have more applicants than you know what to do with, and you can be very selective, you can continue operating in that cut filter. When I went to EE at NDSU a long time ago, it was one out of 4 would graduate, if I recall right. And because there were enough applicants and it was somewhat selective, that's how it was. That's how the things were treated with what were called weeder classes. Here's a class. Most people will fail this class, and so we don't want to waste your time on you after that. And it's changed. We need engineers. We need computer scientists, and we have demography working against us in terms of applicants. What would you describe how, at least in your career span, how has the engineering curriculum changed to be not just a cut filter, and to be able to scaffold folks and help folks at the same time? I guess to what extent can you confidently say that scaffolding doesn't reduce rigor? Because we need to produce good engineers out there. Mm-hmm. So let me start with you, Alan. What are your general thoughts about how can we make engineering education without reducing rigor, less friction, more more tailwinds to help the students? I mean, what are the things that you're seeing?
Yeah. Oh, I think you've really nailed that, Todd. Is that our approach, our philosophy has changed dramatically, even since the time when I was, an undergraduate student. The old adage that was always talked about, first day of class, you walk in, professor says, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of you will be here 4 years from now. And we actually wore that as a badge of honor. I mean, that's, we're a selective institution. If we're not failing more than, a certain percent, we're not doing our job. If we're not, if we're letting all these students go, and then realize that, some of those students who weren't making the cut, some of those could be really darn good engineers. I look at some of our biggest success stories, and they weren't always the straight A students. Right. Some of them were, barely scraping by and barely, passing their classes, and then turn out to be just outstanding engineers. Maybe they think a little bit differently. Maybe they're not a whiz at multivariate calculus, but hey,
maybe
from an
they
engineering
don't like calculus when there's no context.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, it's just
exactly.
memorize
Why
these
am
equations.
I learning this math, and how is it applied? And so our philosophy, and I'm sure Brian will say the same thing, has changed dramatically. Let's not drop our standards, right? I mean, there's still a certain amount of rigor that we expect, that our students need to achieve, but how can we help them to be successful? And sometimes it's a word of encouragement. Sometimes it's a little extra tutoring. Sometimes it's just that open door policy from the faculty member or graduate student TA to give them a little bit of extra help and a little bit of extra time showing that application. So what do we do differently? We integrate more practical applications into some of those earlier classes so that students can see, oh, this is why I need to learn this concept, is that now I can see how it will be applied. Because like you said, if you can't see why, then what am I doing trying to memorize this equation? So we've really changed the approach to education to bring in that application side and help orient these students and help give them a little bit of extra support. And it's amazing what happens when you give a little, you go that extra mile, and how these students can really turn around and be successful. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Very well said. I agree. There's a ton of people that the engineering education system has turned away that would have been very successful engineers and could have contributed to who knows what technologies and all that they could have accomplished. So there's been a huge waste of human capital in that way. And so, yeah, our philosophy has changed dramatically. And, and I think it's a recognition that there's a difference between academic rigor and accommodating students, right? They're not opposites. So you can hold the same academic standards, but be flexible in how your programs are delivered, when assignments are due, be a little bit more accommodating to students and their life circumstances. A lot of those people who dropped out of engineering wasn't because they necessarily couldn't cut it in calculus or physics or whatever. It's because they had other things going on in their lives that just didn't fit into the schedule. And if you have a faculty member who's like, the exam is this date and that's it, no flexibility, the homework's due here, if you don't get it in time, it's a 0. There are things where you can accommodate students and meet them where they are without compromising your academic standards. And that's been, it's not universally accepted, I wouldn't say, but there's been a big shift at least in our mindset about that. So, and circling back, if I could put a shameless plug in for our new building, one of the things I really want to accomplish is just getting our engineering faculty and the math faculty and the physics faculty co-located so they can talk more and collaborate more and develop more of those engineering examples for those calculus and physics classes, and stop teaching math purely from an abstract standpoint by people, from people who are really passionate about math for the sake of math. That's great, but that doesn't resonate with so many of our students. So I'm hoping we can make some headway by getting them working more closely together.
So job prospects. So we don't want to emphasize too much, that getting an engineering education is really hard and it's all this math. For those people considering it, what's placement rate? What are people at all concerned that there might not be jobs? I mean, what is the world of engineering for job prospects?
Yeah, right now it's phenomenal. And I'll say engineering job prospects, job placement has always been strong. Even as the economy goes through different cycles, there's always been a lot of jobs available for engineering, computer science graduates. Right now, I would say it's really through the roof. I think in my 29 years here, I don't know that we've ever had such a hot job market for our engineering grads. I get calls by companies almost on a daily basis, looking for interns and looking for graduates and saying, do I know of anybody? And I know a lot of them, but they all have jobs. And our students are getting multiple job offers coming out. The companies are realizing that if I'm going to get an intern, I now might need to go and get a freshman or a sophomore, whereas I used to be able to get a junior student. So they're reaching down earlier to rein those students in because it's such a competitive environment for our graduates. And that level of hiring does go through cycles, but I do think that that engineering jobs in general are going to remain in high demand, especially when you look at the baby boom generation that's in that retirement phase. Most companies are looking ahead, and they have been for the last 5 or 10 years, realizing we're going to have a huge generation of engineering workforce that we need to replace. And so we've got to start doing that now and finding those students. So yes, tremendous opportunities for our graduates.
Yeah, I'd say exactly the same thing. We had our senior design expo last week, and I walked around and talked to students about their projects, but also what their plans were after graduation. I think we're if not at 100% job placement, we're very close. And those who didn't have jobs were saying like, well, I should probably start looking sometime soon.
Exactly.
So if you're looking for an engineering job and you have a degree, you're almost guaranteed a job. And I hear from companies all the time, and I agree with Alan, like just the demographics, with the baby boomers retiring and fewer students going to get 4-year degrees, plus other factors like we work closely with a lot of the manufacturing companies in Grand Forks, and they can't get enough people to manage their production processes. And so they're looking to automate as much as they possibly can. Those are engineers that they need for that, right? And think about all the manufacturing that's now coming back to the U.S.
Yeah, onshoring and reshoring and friendshoring.
Right.
There's a lot of tumult that will result in a lot of jobs in the States.
Yeah. So things are cyclical, but I feel like this time's different.
And there's always macro, storms, macroeconomic storms where like this year's a bad year, the next year's a great year. Yeah. You'll have that sort of the carrier wave looks like a linear line, but there might be some oscillation, and that oscillation would be both how the overall economy is doing, and then within each industry, you'd see its own oscillation. And I guess the other thing that for people thinking of engineering is some of the more niche degrees might have some. You might not be able to find a petroleum engineering job in a small town in, I guess, Maine. I don't know. We're just trying to think of some place that never heard of any fracking or anything happening in. But the think some of the broader engineering. I mean, certainly think civil, mechanical, to some extent electrical. Even little towns. There's those jobs, but broad trends, demographic trends, the needs of our economy and the onshoring trends. It seems like a very good time to be getting into engineering or
sure.
computer science. Excellent. So 2 more questions here. One is, what is,
Todd,
yes.
can I toss something in real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
For engineering students, especially this season where students are watching their classmates graduate and move on, what does a good internship look like? What should those underclassmen be looking for in a good internship?
What does a good internship looks like, and more broadly speaking, the importance of an internship. That's a good that's a good point to make here, because really there aren't too many. I'm working on some assumptions here, because most engineers kind of know that having a co-op or an internship it's almost become standard, but for people. To Patrick's question, to people who don't necessarily know that, what does that mean, an internship, and how common is it? Alan?
Yeah, sure. You're exactly right, Todd. The value of an internship, I think, has just taken on such great importance, and everybody recognizes why do an internship, right? That's where you learn, I think, more on that application side of. That's where you really get that experience. We teach a lot of the theory and the principles and the concepts, and we give some projects that show that application. But until you get out into the workforce and really see it firsthand, that's a great learning experience.
Yeah, it's
for
like
students.
a summer full time, or sometimes a semester.
Yep, some
nice
summer
part-time
internship is very common. Many students will do a co-op, which means they do a summer and fall, or a spring and summer. Take a semester off and work. And these are paid internships, by the way. It's not these aren't volunteer where we're going to use you as slave labor. Most of these companies are paying very good wages for these interns.
And often that's a try before you buy for companies
it's
too.
Totally and it goes both ways, right? So companies can test drive a student to see if this might be a good future employee. A student gets to check out a company and say, is this something that I want to do for the rest of my life, or do I want to try something different? Which means many students will do multiple internships to get a different flavor for different
What
different
fraction
companies.
of students typically do internships?
Well, I would say between an internship and a co-op, 90+%. I mean, it's
that's
very
a
high.
really critical point.
Yeah.
That it's now become the standard path
Yes.
by which you go through engineering and or undergraduate research, if it's sort of application tailored. You don't have to necessarily go out into industry, but you should look for what is your actual experience working in a team environment on actual deliverables in the real world. And some faculty are working on very interesting research with grad students and postdocs, and they often will consider, some of them will consider the top performing undergrads. And so whether it's undergraduate research or various forms of internships, co-ops, part-time student type roles, that's pretty much expected.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to teach young minds exactly what is engineering, because it is not sitting in a classroom learning math.
Yeah.
It's applied and it's problem solving, and it's team environment, and it's full of all of the human trade-offs of, well, we're not going to do it this way because our salespeople say that if the product has that feature, no one's going to buy it because of this, that, and the other thing. I mean, requirements of what a product is, or the constraints around a process, all of the things that come into what exactly is the problem you're solving. You learn those things out in the wild, so to speak.
And I think what makes an internship successful is that mentorship component that I think the companies can provide. And so students looking for what's a good internship versus what is not is finding a company that understands that and is willing to, we're not just going to have our intern do the grunt work and mop the floors. That's not what this is about, but this is helping to educate the students and bring them along and give them a little bit of mentoring along the way. And I've seen so many companies that have now built out their internship program with that mentorship piece in place and bringing in cohorts of interns so that they can work together, develop those connections and the kind of those group projects, so they experience that. I think that's really important.
That is a great point. Yeah, that's an important thing to look at for an internship, and it's an opportunity just to learn more about the industry and the career options. You know, as an engineer, you have a lot of options. Are you going to work for a large, like Fortune 500 type company, or a small regional company? You want to work in manufacturing. You want to do something that takes advantage of your engineering degree, but maybe isn't hardcore engineering. There's a ton of options, and internships are a great way to just learn more about yourself and where you fit into an engineering career.
So that fit part, one of the questions I have here, that inevitably anyone that is an engineer has conversations along these lines. Are engineers born or made? You know, or both. And if anyone has seen the Dilbert animation, the actual cartoon animation live, you know, not just the
Knack?
Newspaper one, the Knack. Oh yeah, I think search YouTube for Dilbert and the Knack. It's hilarious and it seems to be kind of true. Anyone want to tackle that?
I think it's got to be both. I mean, I know people who, you know, from the earliest age, like were definitely future engineers. I mean, they're very curious about how things work. They take things apart, you know, even if they couldn't put them back together.
Systemizers, pedantic, you know, some autistic traits, you know, mechanistic minded, super detailed.
They're born engineers, but I know other people who never developed that knack at an early age, but as they've gotten into, I don't know, a career, or even when they come to school, they start learning more and just developing a strong interest in something and wanting to dive deep into it and understand it. So in that way, maybe that's just revealing some innate characteristics of themselves, but in a way they're made by the environment that they've been put in and the educational opportunities that they're given. I don't know, that's my less than ideal answer, perhaps.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it there, Brian. I think there is some of both in there, and you know what's unique, maybe a little bit about engineering as a discipline, is that it to be a good engineer, I think you have to have some creativity and you have to have some analytical ability, and a lot of times you get, you know, people that are left brain and others that are right brain, and the ideal engineer has a mix, in my opinion. So some people have that innate ability; they're kind of born with it. I'm more of an analytical person, and I think I was born with that. It just came natural to me. The creative part is what was challenging for me, and other engineers that I found has been more of the opposite, you know, that they're very creative, but they maybe struggle a little bit more with the math and the science. And so part of it is you maybe you're born with some of those abilities that make a great engineer, but you also have to learn some of those other parts. And so, a little bit of a mix of both nature and nurture.
Yeah, there's so many different things to do with an engineering degree. And, you know, sometimes we'll have students who seem to struggle, and some faculty might say, you know, do we really want this person to be an engineer? And I think they'll find their way, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if they're not really strong in one area that you think is very important, they will probably make up for it in other areas, right? And there's so many different roles as an engineer that require different types of intelligence, and I think there's a place for almost everybody. Yeah,
and if you don't, but we also need, and some would argue we need even more, qualified technicians and really good people in the trades. And like I've interacted with some plumbers where it's like, yeah, you think exactly like an engineer. You're not saying universally all plumbers do, but man, you would be an excellent plumber if you have, say, the knack without maybe the math affinity. And for some people, the math is the obstacle. In fact, if there is any one obstacle, besides, can you go to a place that, maybe I can't move, maybe you don't have access to the funds, but by and large, it's the math. But if you are a highly systematizing person, you're very spatially oriented, you're very detail oriented. There's the current engineering journey is less of a cut filter than it was maybe for when we were in undergrad. So there's things available to you, and now the internet and really cool YouTube videos like three blue, one brown, three blue, one brown, I think is what it is. I mean, visualizing like Fourier transform visualizing, that's unbelievable. Like I didn't understand what a Fourier transform was. You know, I mimicked it through undergrad. I mean, I know what it's used for, you know, time domain and frequency domain conversion and all that other stuff. But what's actually really happening within the equation, no idea until, you know, I'm middle-aged and I watch this insanely potent YouTube visualizer go. It just made it all make sense.
Sure.
So there's ways in which you can learn why the math matters if it's a struggle. But if you just can't do it or just unwilling to do it, or you don't want to, you know, sit in front of a computer all day, but you think you've got a systematizing brain, there's also great careers to go into in the mechanical arts, and we need those too. All right, so what can people who are listening to this do if they want to support our universities? You know, what can they do to? And also, obviously, on behalf of both foundations, you know, they can generously give for engineering scholarships or engineering buildings and lots of other things. And by all means, you can add context to that, detail if you like. But there's other ways to engage. Like maybe you're an engineer in the community. You know, maybe you're an employer. But what do you say to members of the community that might be listening, and how they can help our schools and help our future engineers?
Yeah, I think encouraging young people to pursue their interests in science and technology is a big part of it. I love when we host robotics tournaments, for example, and you know the ballroom at the Union is full of parents who have been very supportive of their youngsters, and most of them are not engineers, right? But they recognized in their kids that they have a passion and their interest in these things, and they've encouraged them, and they travel around bringing them to the various tournaments and support them in a bunch of other ways. I think that level of encouragement is really what we need more of at that level, so that we can ensure that we have a strong pipeline of engineers in the future. So that's one area that I would name. I'm sure Alan has other examples.
Well, I think what you talk about there is extremely important on helping to the awareness piece of what is engineering and what is the importance of that. We've had tremendous support from, you know, our local engineering organizations, like our FM Engineers Club, that part of their mission is to help on that K-12 outreach part, which is, you know, these robotics. Why do we do that? Well, it stimulates the interest in pursuing engineering careers. And that has to happen at an earlier age, you know, because by high school, many of these students have already defined their path, in part based on the classes that they've chosen along the way. And so we need to get students thinking a little bit earlier in middle school or before to recognize, hey, that this is a great career option. Okay, I'm going to need some math skills. So maybe going for that higher level math class and pursuing that. So building that awareness, that encouragement in students. You know, we all run a lot of those K-12 outreach programs, and having these people step in to help and volunteer and take part in that is just a huge part of it. So I think there's many ways. Advocating for the colleges, like we talked about, you know, the legislature was great to us this past year in giving money so that we could improve our facilities. A lot of our success in that was based on many of our alumni and our company representatives contacting their legislature and recognizing we need to support higher education. We need to support our universities because they are they are importing labor. We are an economic driver, and they recognize the importance. And so there's a lot of ways that our community, our parents, our leaders can help support what we're doing here.
Well, you guys are clearly very passionate about educating future engineers and bringing them or keeping them in North Dakota for jobs that we need to fill in North Dakota, and around the country. I really appreciate your time. This has been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.